Reacher Season 2 begins deep in the icy Catskill Mountains, where the forest is buried under darkness and snow. In the middle of the night, a helicopter cuts through the cold air above the trees. Everything feels quiet for a second, until the chopper suddenly drops a man's body from the sky. The body falls hard through the darkness and crashes into the snow below. Maybe the snow softened the landing a little, but judging by the way it hits, that man clearly wasn't walking away from it. Meanwhile, Jack Reacher is out there looking as rough and homeless as ever. He walks into a thrift store to buy himself some clothes, because apparently this man still believes owning more than one outfit is a luxury. But when he reaches the counter, he realizes he does not have enough cash to pay for everything. So Reacher heads across the street to use an ATM. That is when he notices something strange. A woman is standing at the machine, clearly shaken, with blood on her hands and tears almost ready to fall from her eyes. Reacher instantly understands that something is wrong. He looks around and spots a car nearby, then calmly asks the woman if she is being carjacked. She quietly confirms it and tells him that her young son is still sitting in the back seat. That is all Reacher needs to hear. He walks straight toward the vehicle, and without wasting a second, destroys the carjacker in classic Reacher fashion. The man barely gets time to process what is happening before Reacher beats him down and saves both the mother and her child. After that, instead of making a big deal out of it, Reacher simply goes back to the ATM like he just handled a minor inconvenience. Once he withdraws his money, he checks the receipt and notices something unusual. The transaction amounts are not random. They are arranged like a hidden message, 110 and 1030. Reacher immediately reads it as a distress signal from the 110th Special Investigations Unit. The message basically means the 110th needs help at 10:30. Realizing this is serious, Reacher returns to the thrift store and asks to use the cashier's phone. He calls his old friend, private investigator Francis Neagley. Unfortunately, Neagley has terrible news waiting for him. Their former teammate Calvin France, one of the members of the 110th Special Investigations Unit, has been murdered. The 110th was not just any military unit. Reacher had led it himself. So when Neagley tells him what happened and asks him to come to New York, Reacher does not hesitate. He leaves immediately. The story then jumps back to the early days of the 110th, when Reacher had just formed the unit. He personally selected every member based on their specific talents. Calvin France stood out because Reacher saw him as extremely sharp, the kind of guy who noticed things others missed. France also admired Reacher a lot and clearly respected him as a leader. Besides Reacher, the original team included Neagley, France, David O'Donnell, Manuel Orozco, Jorge Sanchez, Tony Swan, Stan Lowry, and Carla Dixon. When Reacher first brings them together, he tells everyone to clean up the office. But within minutes, it becomes obvious that these people are not exactly moving like a perfectly organized team. In fact, they are so out of sync that even Reacher looks unsure whether they can actually work together. So instead of forcing some big inspirational speech, he decides to take them all out for beer. The story returns to the present, 2 years, 7 months, and 19 days after the events in Margrave. Reacher arrives in New York and meets Neagley at a diner. There, she fills him in on everything. France had a wife named Angela and a young son named Mikey. She also reminds him that Stan Lowry, another former member of the 110th, died 2 years earlier in a traffic accident in Montana. With France dead and the situation looking worse by the minute, Reacher and Neagley decide to visit Angela and ask her what she knows. But as they leave the diner, someone is already watching them. A bald man sitting inside a black Ford sees Reacher and Neagley together. He has a list containing the names of the remaining 110th members, and after spotting them, he circles both of their names. At the same time, another man with a scar on his face notices them too. He contacts his superior and reports that Neagley has made contact with Reacher. On the way to Angela's place, Reacher calls David O'Donnell and leaves him a voicemail using the 110th distress signal. He does not explain much, but the message is clear enough. Something has happened, and the old team may be in danger. When Reacher and Neagley reach Angela France's home, the mood becomes heavy. Angela is still grieving, but she gathers herself and explains what she knows. She says she and Mikey had been away while France was probably working on some dangerous case. Then France disappeared. When Angela came back home, she found the entire place completely ransacked. Angela gives them the keys to France's office, telling them that it was broken into as well. Before they leave, Mikey says the old 110th slogan, "You do not mess with the special investigators," and honestly, he could not have said anything more true. Elsewhere, the scarred man contacts his boss again. This time, he tells him which hotel Reacher and Neagley have checked into. His boss orders him to keep watching them. Reacher and Neagley then go to France's office. As soon as they step inside, they see the place has been torn apart. Whoever searched it was not being careful. They were desperate to find something. Papers, drawers, and furniture are scattered everywhere. While going through the mess, Reacher and Neagley eventually find an old group photo of the 110th buried among the wreckage. Then Neagley notices something useful on France's keychain. There is a mailbox key attached to it. Conveniently, a post office is located right across the street. The two head over, hoping the mailbox might lead them to whatever France was hiding. But the post office is already closed for the day, so they decide to come back in the morning. With the rest of the surviving 110th members still unreachable, and no solid lead left to chase that night, Reacher and Neagley return to their hotel. After everything that has happened, they take a moment to blow off some steam. The story then flashes back again to the first day. The 110th was officially brought together. Reacher had taken everyone to the officers' club for drinks, but the whole thing was painfully awkward. It had the energy of people meeting their online friends in person for the first time. Nobody really knows how to act, and everyone is still trying to figure each other out. Then a man approaches and points out that lower-ranked personnel, like Neagley at the time, are not allowed to drink in that club. The situation gets tense fast. Words turn into shoving, and within moments, the whole thing explodes into a full-on brawl between the 110th and members of the 91st. After the fight, the 110th leaves the club and gathers outside around a campfire. With music playing and beer going around, the awkwardness finally starts to fade. Everyone begins to loosen up, laugh, and actually connect as a team. That night becomes the real beginning of their bond. It is also the night their famous slogan is created, and the same night they take the group photo that Reacher and Neagley later find in France's destroyed office. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a man using the fake name Adrian Mount checks in at the Los Angeles airport. Once he is done, he burns his fake passport, making sure there is no evidence left behind that could connect him to that identity. The next morning, Reacher and Neagley return to the post office. Their goal is simple: find France's mailbox. The only problem is they do not know which mailbox the key belongs to. So they start trying different boxes one by one. It takes a few attempts, but eventually they find the right one. Inside, they discover France's mail, which may be the next clue in whatever case got him killed. Reacher and Neagley leave the post office with what seems like their first real lead: a flash drive hidden among France's mail. The only problem is that they cannot open it right away because the drive does not fit any port they have with them. So Neagley heads out to buy an adapter, while Reacher borrows her car and drives into a rougher part of town to get himself a gun. And because this is Reacher, he does not exactly go through legal channels. He tracks down a local drug dealer and takes a weapon from him, because in Reacher's world, stealing is apparently fine as long as the person you are stealing from is worse than you. Meanwhile, the mysterious man from the airport, the one traveling under fake names, meets with two passport forgers. He needs more false identities, and once he gets what he came for, he kills both of them. No loose ends. No witnesses, no one left alive who can expose who he really is. Later, Reacher and Neagley return to their hotel, only to discover that their rooms have been completely searched. The place is destroyed in the same way France's home and office were. Drawers are pulled out, clothes are thrown around, and someone has clearly gone through everything looking for something. They grab their guns, ready for whoever might still be inside. But instead of finding an enemy, they come face to face with David O'Donnell. He explains that the rooms were already like this when he arrived, and he came as soon as he got Reacher's voicemail. Now the team is slowly coming back together. Neagley finally connects the flash drive, but there is another obstacle waiting for them. The files are locked behind a password, and the system only gives them a limited number of attempts before time runs out. They start thinking through possible answers, testing anything France might have used. After several wrong guesses and a lot of frustration, they finally realize the password is connected to the person France admired most. The answer is Reacher. Once the drive unlocks, the group prints everything out and starts going through the files. One document contains a list of names, and every name has the same initials, AM. Two of those names are familiar, because the fake passport man has already used them as aliases. This confirms that France was investigating someone who keeps moving through different identities. Another file contains a long list of random numbers. At first glance, they seem completely meaningless. None of the three can figure out what they are supposed to represent, but everyone knows France would not have saved them unless they mattered. O'Donnell points out that 3 people are not enough for whatever they are dealing with. They need more of the 110th, so the group decides to visit Tony Swan. When they arrive at Swan's house, nobody answers the door. That alone feels wrong. Reacher breaks the glass, reaches inside and unlocks the door, but Swan is not there. Instead, they find his dog dead inside the house. It is a grim discovery, and it tells them more than they want to know. Reacher immediately assumes the worst. If Swan is missing and his dog is dead, then Swan is probably dead too. Someone is not just targeting France. Someone is hunting down the special investigators one by one. Reacher, Neagley, and O'Donnell leave Swan's house and try contacting the other members of the 110th. But then Reacher notices something familiar, the same black Ford from earlier. He realizes they are being followed. So naturally, he decides to introduce himself the only way he knows how. Reacher walks straight over to the car and knocks the bald man inside unconscious. The problem is that the man is not one of the killers. He is NYPD Detective Gaetano Russo, the officer investigating France's murder. That means Reacher has now punched out a New York police detective, which is not exactly helpful. Instead of just being hunted by unknown enemies, they now also have to avoid getting caught by the NYPD. Reacher may be brilliant in a fight, but this one was definitely not his smartest move. Things get worse when O'Donnell tries calling Sanchez and Orozco. Both of their voicemail boxes are full, which is never a good sign. If two more members of the 110th have gone silent, then the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. Reacher decides they need to go to Atlantic City and find Sanchez and Orozco themselves. Elsewhere, the scarred man reports back to his boss. He tells him that Reacher is extremely dangerous and that if he ever has to deal with him directly, he will need backup. Clearly, whoever is behind all this is starting to understand that Reacher is not an easy target. The trio heads to the airport, planning to ditch Neagley's Range Rover and rent a new car so they are harder to track. But at the airport, Reacher suddenly spots Carla Dixon, another former member of the 110th. She has been working undercover and is just as surprised to see them as they are to see her. Reacher quickly brings her into the situation and asks her to use her fake ID to rent a vehicle for them. Then he tells her what they know so far. France is dead, Swan is most likely dead, and Sanchez and Orozco have disappeared. The old team is being picked apart. The story flashes back again to their military days, when the 110th was still active. Even back then, there was clearly something between Reacher and Dixon. They had chemistry, but neither of them really acted on it. Dixon was also the one who coined one of the unit's most important ideas. In an investigation, details matter. Back in the present, the trio becomes a squad of 4. Dixon studies the strange number lists from France's flash drive. Since she is excellent with numbers, the others hope she might see something they missed. She notices that the numbers are written like fractions. Some pages contain 26 numbers, while others have 27. That feels intentional, but even Dixon cannot figure out what the pattern means yet. Meanwhile, the scarred man, now identified as Seropian, updates his boss again. He says Dixon rented a car using a fake name, and all 4 of them appear to be heading toward Atlantic City. Most likely, they are going there to search for their missing teammates. Once they arrive in Atlantic City, the group goes to Sanchez and Orozco's office. Just like France's office and their hotel rooms, the place has been torn apart. Whoever searched it was clearly looking for something specific. While going through the wreckage, Reacher notices one strange detail. He seems to be the only person who does not have a copy of the 110th group photo. Among the scattered items, they also find a picture of Sanchez standing with a woman at a bar. Judging by the photo, she may have been someone important to him. The bar in the picture is called the Lucky Lounge, so the team heads there hoping the woman can tell them something. When they arrive, Reacher tells Dixon and O'Donnell to wait outside while he and Neagley go in to ask questions. Inside, Reacher talks to the bartender and says they are friends of Sanchez. He asks about the woman in the photo, whose name is Milna, but the bartender immediately gets the wrong idea. He assumes Reacher and Neagley are trouble. Instead of helping them, he signals one of his men to take them to the back, supposedly to meet Milna. In reality, he sends a warning ahead, telling Milna to grab her things and run. Outside, Dixon and O'Donnell spot Milna leaving in a hurry and chase after her. At the same time, the men leading Reacher and Neagley suddenly turn on them. But that turns out to be a terrible mistake. The fight barely lasts. Reacher and Neagley take them down quickly and efficiently, while Dixon manages to catch Milna before she can escape. Back inside the Lucky Lounge, the mood changes pretty quickly. After seeing what Reacher and his people are capable of, the staff suddenly becomes much more welcoming. They even start serving the squad free drinks, which is probably the smartest decision anyone in that bar makes all night. Milna finally explains why she ran. She says another frightening-looking man had already come looking for her earlier. This man had a scar across his cheek, and he was asking whether Sanchez had left behind any kind of flash drive or digital storage device. That description matches Seropian perfectly, which means Langston's people were already one step ahead. Reacher and the others ask Milne whether France or Swan had been in contact with Sanchez and Orozco. Milne confirms that France was in Atlantic City about a week earlier, and all three of them had been working together on some kind of case. She also remembers the last time she saw Sanchez. He was sitting on a stool in that same bar when he received a phone call. During the call, Sanchez repeated a strange phrase, 650 at 100,000 each. Milne does not know what it meant, but she remembers Sanchez becoming visibly concerned right after hearing it. Whatever those numbers represented, it was enough to make him leave in a hurry. Later, the four of them sit inside a casino, trying to break down the meaning of 650 at 100,000 each. The obvious calculation gives them $65 million, so for a moment, they wonder if Sanchez and Orozco had uncovered some massive casino robbery. But O'Donnell quickly points out that stealing from a casino is not exactly simple. Casinos track money extremely carefully, watching every chip, every table, every transaction, and every dollar moving in or out of the building. That makes them think of another possibility. Sanchez and Orozco had been working as freelance security consultants for casinos, so maybe they discovered something while doing that work. If they found something dangerous, it would make sense that they called France and Orozco for help. The team goes to see David Wright, the casino's head of security. As soon as they meet him, Wright recognizes them from the story Sanchez and Orozco used to tell about the 110th. Reacher tells him the truth. Sanchez and Orozco may already be dead. Dixon gives Wright the list of strange numbers from France's flash drive, hoping that a casino security expert might recognize the pattern. But Wright cannot make sense of it either. The numbers mean nothing to him, and neither does the 650 at 100,000 each phrase. The alias names with the initials AM also fail to trigger anything useful. Before leaving, Reacher asks Wright to check whether any of the AM names have been used to book rooms at hotels nearby. Wright agrees to run the search. Since they were friends of Sanchez and Orozco, he also offers them a free suite in the casino hotel as a gesture of respect. The squad moves into the suite and finally gets a small window to breathe. They sit around with beers, catching up like old soldiers who know the situation is bad but still need a moment to feel human. That night, Reacher decides to enjoy a proper meal, because even in the middle of a murder investigation, the man still knows how to respect good food. Dixon, meanwhile, heads down to the casino floor and starts winning at the tables. Her success gets attention. A man in a suit approaches her and accuses her of counting cards. Technically, counting cards in your head is not illegal, but casinos do not exactly appreciate it. Instead of making a scene, the man offers her 2 concert tickets and politely encourages her to leave the table. Dixon refuses the tickets. Instead, she tells him to give them to a man wearing a members-only jacket. That man turns out to be Seropian. Soon after, Reacher and Dixon leave the casino together and take a walk. At first, they talk casually, letting the conversation drift from one thing to another. But Dixon notices 2 men following them. She also spots a familiar-looking car parked ahead. Reacher catches her signal immediately. Without saying much, the 2 of them jump a fence and move into an industrial area. Since they are still near a residential zone, using guns would attract too much attention, so they know this fight has to stay quiet. Reacher draws one of the men away and takes him down brutally with a trowel. Dixon handles the other attacker using a crowbar, proving that she is just as dangerous in close quarters. But just as she finishes with her opponent, Seropian appears and fires a silenced shot. Dixon reacts fast enough to avoid the worst of it, giving Reacher the opening he needs. He grabs Seropian and beats him down without mercy. Then he forces Seropian's face into wet cement, holding him there until the man drowns and dies. Afterward, they search Seropian's pockets and find his car keys. Inside his vehicle, they discover files filled with information on the surviving members of the 110th. Seropian's people had clearly been tracking all of them. They also find his phone. Reacher checks the call history and dials the last number. The call connects directly to Langston, Seropian's boss. Reacher immediately starts provoking him, making it clear that killing members of the 110th has consequences. But Langston stays calm. He does not sound scared at all. Instead, he warns Reacher that things are not going to end well for him. After the call ends, Dixon finds something else inside the car. A parking pass for New Age technologies. It is another major clue, and it points them back toward New York. As for the bodies, Reacher chooses the most practical disposal method available. He dumps them into the wet cement, letting the construction site hide the evidence. Back in the suite, Reacher cleans and disinfects his wounds. Dixon starts researching new age technologies and discovers that it is an aerospace company headquartered in New York. Then she notices that she has a wound too and asks Reacher to disinfect it for her. But what begins as basic first aid quickly turns into something much more personal between them. Let's just say the scene moves from cleaning wounds to creating a very different kind of damage. Meanwhile, the man using the AM aliases arrives at a meeting location. Another man hands him a map showing 2 ideal ambush points. He also confirms that all 650 items are inside the truck and that the vehicle is being tracked by GPS. The alias man assures him that the weapons are going overseas and that the truck driver will not be harmed. Of course, with a man like this, any promise already sounds suspicious. The next morning, Dixon and Reacher compare what they each learned from the night before. Their conversation is interrupted when David Wright arrives at the suite with terrible news. The Atlanta police have found the bodies of Sanchez and Orozco near the Catskill Mountains, close to where France's body was discovered. Their injuries match France's wounds, which means they were killed the same way. Just like France, they were thrown from a helicopter. Now there is no doubt left. France, Sanchez, and Orozco were all murdered by the same people. Every clue is pointing them back to New York. Dixon says what everyone is already thinking, but Reacher is focused on something else entirely. His friends, his brothers in arms, are being executed one by one. And if they are going back into the center of this fight, he knows exactly what they need next: more guns. The story then jumps back 10 days before the current events. Langston's men have France tied up and are torturing him for sensitive information, but France refuses to break. Even under brutal pressure, he stays loyal to his team and gives them nothing. Then, in one final act of defiance, France spits directly in Langston's face, making it clear that no matter what they do to him, he is not talking. Langston's patience finally snaps. Furious at France's refusal to talk, he swings a crowbar into France's leg with brutal force, then orders his men to get the helicopter ready. A little later, as France is being dragged toward the open door of the chopper, he suddenly laughs. Langston looks at him, confused, and asks what he could possibly find funny in a moment like this. France, barely holding himself together, tells him he is just thinking about what the big guy is going to do to him. And with that, France is thrown out of the helicopter. Langston has no idea what those words really mean yet. He does not understand that by killing France, he has just invited a human wrecking ball into his life. Because Reacher is coming, and when Reacher comes for someone, it usually ends very badly for them. Back in the present, Reacher visits an arms dealer. There is no long negotiation, no unnecessary conversation. He lets the money speak for him and loads up on weapons, ammunition, and burner phones. If they are heading into a war, Reacher wants everyone prepared. As the squad drives back toward New York, Neagley looks for a motel where they can stay off the radar. But before they can settle into any kind of plan, a police car appears behind them and starts following. Then the siren comes on. Dixon pulls over, and the officer tells everyone to stay inside the vehicle. A few moments later, Russo arrives on the scene and arrests Reacher. Before Russo takes him away, Reacher quickly gives instructions to the others. He tells Dixon and Neagley to follow the New Age parking pass lead, while O'Donnell comes with him and plays the role of his lawyer. While Russo brings Reacher and O'Donnell to the station, Dixon and Neagley head to New Age Technologies. There, they meet Marlo Burns, the company's director of operations. Dixon does not waste time pretending this is a casual visit. She makes it clear that the situation is serious and asks for information about the person who was issued the parking pass they found. At the police station, Russo starts by telling Reacher he has bad news. But Reacher cuts him off, saying he already knows Sanchez and Orozco are dead. Russo is surprised, but he admits that all he really wants is the truth behind these murders. Reacher suggests they stop wasting time and trade information. Meanwhile, Marlo returns with the name connected to the parking pass. It was issued to Trevor Seropian, who had apparently come to New Age for an interview. That confirms Seropian had a direct connection to the company. Back at the station, things get tense between Reacher and Russo. Neither man trusts the other, and both of them are used to doing things their own way. O'Donnell steps in before the conversation turns into another fight, and eventually they agree to share what they know. Reacher explains the strange phrase, 650 at 100,000 each, while Russo gives them a new lead from France's office. Apparently the printer there had a memory card, and because it ran out of ink, one unfinished print job was still stored inside. The document was about Azari Mahmoud, an arms dealer already known to Interpol for supplying terrorist groups. Sanchez and Orozco had been digging up information on him for France. Then O'Donnell realizes something important. Azari Mahmoud is one of the names on the list of AM aliases from France's flash drive. Reacher writes down all the alias names for Russo, who runs them through the system immediately. While they wait for results, Dixon and Neagley talk about Reacher and their complicated histories with him. During that conversation, Dixon suddenly cracks part of the number code. The numbers on France's pages are not random at all. They line up with workdays, assuming a 6-day work week. Since there are 7 pages, each containing 26 or 27 numbers, the pages appear to represent the last 7 months of the year. It is another piece of the puzzle, but the full picture still is not clear. Russo comes back with a hit. One of the aliases, Azari Mahmoud, is now traveling under the name Alexander Markopoulos. He has just taken a flight from Denver to JFK. Russo thinks they finally have him cornered, but AM is not that easy to catch. When AM arrives at the airport, he immediately notices law enforcement waiting for him. He understands right away that his cover has been burned. Instead of walking into the trap, he calls Langston and tells him there has been a delay. Langston is furious. Every wasted minute puts the whole operation at risk, and if they are exposed now, they are looking at federal prison time. As AM leaves the airport, he notices an advertisement for a cosmetic surgeon named Dr. El-Zogby. The doctor looks surprisingly similar to him, and that gives AM a new idea. Not a good idea for the doctor, obviously. The squad regroups and Dixon and Neagley share what they learned at New Age. They also track down Seropian's home address. After a quick online search, they find one of his neighbors, Barbara Gottelsman, a woman in her late 70s, who confirms that Seropian really does live there. Before going to the house, Reacher makes one stop at a hardware store, because when Reacher starts buying random supplies, it usually means someone is about to have a very bad day. At Seropian's house, Reacher puts together a crude pipe bomb and slides it through the front door. The explosion proves their suspicion immediately. Marlo Burns set them up. Inside the house, a group of armed men had been waiting to ambush them. One of them is already burning from the blast when Reacher and the squad move in. The fight is quick, violent, and completely one-sided. Reacher and his team clear the house and take down every threat inside. Just as the fight ends, Reacher notices a white SUV outside trying to escape. The man inside had been sent to confirm whether the 110th was dead. Reacher sprints after the vehicle, but even he can tell he will not catch it on foot, so he does the most Reacher thing imaginable. He grabs a barbecue grill and hurls it straight into the windshield. The SUV crashes. When Reacher reaches the wreck, he finds the driver is Brian Collins, an employee of New Age. Unfortunately for New Age, they made the mistake of giving a high-risk job to an older man who clearly was not built for this kind of pressure. Before Reacher can get anything useful out of him, Brian dies from a heart attack. Back inside the house, the squad checks the bodies of the men they killed, but none of them are carrying anything helpful. No documents, no IDs, nothing that points directly to Langston. Later, Russo storms into their motel room, furious at how reckless they have been. He tears into them for turning everything into a war zone. Reacher tells him that Marlo Burns led them into a trap, and while Russo is clearly frustrated, he says the police will not come after them for now, but he warns them to stop acting like cowboys before they make things even worse. Russo also reveals that AM never showed up at the airport, which means all of his known aliases are now burned and useless. Before Russo leaves, Reacher gives him the number to his burner phone, opening the door for a very uneasy partnership. Less than an hour after Russo tells them to stop doing reckless cowboy nonsense, the team immediately does the exact opposite. They put on masks, climb into Brian Collins' vehicle, and Reacher drives straight into the lobby of New Age technologies like subtlety has never existed in his life. The crash triggers the alarms instantly, which means they have almost no time before security or police arrive. They give themselves 2 minutes. Inside, the team moves fast, grabbing whatever might be useful. Files, hard drives, laptops, anything that could contain information about New Age and Little Wing. Reacher even takes a bottle of whiskey, because apparently evidence collection also includes refreshments now. But before leaving, something on the wall catches his eye. It is a company employee photo. Reacher takes it with him. Later, when the squad studies the picture, they notice something that changes the entire mood in the room. Swan is in the photo. That discovery hits hard. Until now, they believed Swan was another victim. But if he was working at New Age, the same company connected to Langston, Seropian, and everything happening around them, then the situation becomes much more complicated. Was Swan involved with the people hunting the 110th? Was he forced into it? Or is there something they still do not understand? Whatever the answer is, the case just became a lot messier. At a restaurant, the team sits together. frustrated by how little useful information they managed to pull from the New Age break-in. O'Donnell finally says what some of them are thinking: maybe Swan was dirty. Reacher refuses to accept it. They learn that Swan had been working as the assistant director of security at New Age under Shane Langston, the company's head of security. And with more New Age employees turning up around the case, Reacher decides they need to start investigating the company from the inside out, employee by employee. Meanwhile, Russo is getting absolutely chewed out because of the chaos at New Age. The damage, the alarms, the stolen equipment, all of it lands right on his desk because he is the detective already connected to Reacher and the 110th. While digging through the stolen data, Neagley finds an email from Swan to Marlo Burns. In the message, Swan references Jimi Hendrix's album Axis, Bold as Love, specifically the sixth track, Little Wing. That detail immediately feels strange. O'Donnell points out that Swan hated Hendrix. He did not casually dislike him. He genuinely could not stand his music. So if Swan was suddenly using a Hendrix song title in an email, then he probably was not talking about music at all. Their instinct is right. Reacher searches for Little Wing and discovers that it is the name of a massive federal defense project, the largest contract New Age has ever handled. The system had even gone through a demonstration for military officials and political figures, including Senator Malcolm Lav, the man who helped push the project through Congress. O'Donnell already knows Lav's reputation, and it is not exactly clean. The senator has a long history of suspicious deals and political dirt following him around. So now the team is looking at a defense contractor, a corrupt politician, murdered investigators, and a weapons project called Little Wing. Dixon says the obvious next move is to talk to Lav. But getting close to a senator is not simple. Men like Lav are surrounded by layers of security, staff, handlers, and political protection. Still, the bigger issue for Reacher is Swan. Even with all this evidence piling up around New Age, he refuses to believe his old teammate betrayed them. The story then flashes back to their military days, when the 110th had taken down a major drug operation. During the bust, they recovered 48 bricks of heroin, but when Dixon checks the haul, she notices one brick is missing. Lurie swears he loaded all 48 bricks into Swan's car. When they search the vehicle, they find the missing brick tucked under a seat. It is the first time Swan ever looks suspicious during an investigation, and even though it may not prove anything by itself, in the present, that memory suddenly feels more important than it did before. Elsewhere, AM makes his next move inside Dr. Elzogby's office. He does not waste any time. He kills both the doctor and the secretary, steals the doctor's identification, and walks out unnoticed. Now he has a fresh identity and a face that can pass just close enough to keep him moving. Back with the team, O'Donnell finds information on Senator Lavai's legislative director, Daniel Boyd. Boyd is scheduled to attend a fundraiser in Boston that same night. Since Boyd likely knows more about Little Wing than most people around Lavai, the team decides he is their best way in. Reacher finally returns Russo's call, but he does not tell him what they found at New Age. Instead, he gives Russo just enough to keep him useful, telling him to run background checks on New Age employees himself. Then Reacher hangs up before Russo can ask too many questions. The team's next stop is Boston. Neagley and Dixon plan to visit Marlo Burns, while Reacher and O'Donnell go looking for drugs they can use in their setup against Boyd. And of course, when Dixon and Neagley arrive at Marlo's house, they find that Marlo has already taken her daughter and disappeared. She left behind cash and valuables, which makes it clear she knew trouble was coming and ran before anyone could reach her. Meanwhile, AM rents a car under Dr. Elzogby's stolen identity, keeping himself one step ahead. At the same time, the 110th arrives in Boston dressed sharper than usual, because this mission requires them to blend into a much more polished crowd. At the opera fundraiser, Dixon spots Daniel Boyd. She works him effortlessly, drawing his attention and letting him believe he is the one making the move. It does not take long before Boyd offers her a seat. Neagley watches everything from a distance, making sure the plan stays on track. Meanwhile, Reacher and O'Donnell focus on the strange numbers from France's drive. Then Reacher finally cracks it. The fractions are not random. They are tracking a success rate. There were 2197 total attempts. Out of those, 1547 were successful. When you subtract the successes from the total, you get 650 failures. And there it is. 650 at 100,000 each. The phrase suddenly makes sense. The 650 are not dollars or casino chips. They are failed units, failed tests, or failed weapons, each valued at $100,000. The pieces are finally starting to lock into place. A moment later, Neagley signals that Dixon and Boyd have left the opera. That means the next stage of the plan is ready, and for this part, they bring in a familiar face. Outside, Dixon leads Boyd to her car, where she reveals the drugs Reacher and O'Donnell picked up earlier. Dixon stays clean, of course, but Boyd does not hesitate. He takes the bait immediately. Right on cue, Oscar Finlay, the legend from Margrave, appears in Boston and arrests Boyd for drug use. At the station, Reacher and O'Donnell pretend to be FBI agents. They put pressure on Boyd from every angle, threatening to expose his drug use and his affair to his wife. Boyd folds fast. Under pressure, he tells them what Little Wing really is. The project began as advanced anti-missile software designed to protect commercial aircraft. But then New Age entered the picture and proposed modifying the system for offensive use. Instead of helping planes avoid missiles, the software could be placed inside shoulder-fired missiles, turning them into terrifyingly accurate weapons. In simple terms, Little Wing would act like an advanced targeting assist system. A missile could look like it missed its target, then suddenly turn back and hit it directly. And that means whoever controls Little Wing would be holding a very dangerous piece of technology. Boyd gives them one more important detail before they leave. New Age does not operate from just one location. The company has two major facilities. The software side is based in New York, while the hardware operation is located in Denver. That is enough for Reacher and O'Donnell. They have squeezed Boyd for everything useful, so they leave the station. Outside, Reacher has a brief reunion with Finlay. Reacher is surprised to learn that Finlay did not retire after everything that happened in Margrave. Instead, he is now a lieutenant. Neagley joins them for a quick introduction, but there is no time for a long catch-up. The 110th is still in the middle of a hunt, and every minute matters. Reacher and O'Donnell decide to head toward Homeland Security in Washington, D.C., hoping they can dig deeper into A.M. Neagley and Dixon, meanwhile, are sent to Denver to check out New Age's hardware facility. Reacher mentions that his brother Joe used to work at Homeland Security, and some of Joe's old connections might still be useful. When someone asks how Joe is doing, Reacher quietly reveals that Joe was murdered. Before they split up completely, the squad stops at a steakhouse, but they do not even make it through the front door before trouble arrives. A biker gang pulls into the parking lot, clearly sent to take out the 110th. They look ready for a fight, but unfortunately for them, they have badly misjudged who they are dealing with. The parking lot turns into chaos as Reacher and the others tear through the bikers. What was supposed to be an ambush quickly becomes a lesson in why you do not pick a fight with Jack Reacher. When the dust settles, Reacher takes a phone from one of the downed bikers and calls Langston. By now, Langston understands that Reacher is getting dangerously close to the truth, so instead of threatening him again, he tries to make a deal. He offers Reacher whatever he wants, as long as he backs off and stops coming after him. Reacher's answer is simple. The only thing he wants is to throw Langston out of a helicopter. Meanwhile, things are tense at O'Donnell's house. He tells his wife, Lily, to pack up and leave with their 2 kids until the case is finished. Reacher is there too, since he is the one who still has a possible connection at Homeland Security. Then O'Donnell receives a message from Neagley and Dixon. They have reached the New Age facility in Denver. At the facility, Neagley and Dixon pose as representatives from the Defense Contract Management Agency. They ask for the delivery schedule for the missiles, hoping to intercept the shipment before it moves. But they are just a little too late. The shipment left 10 minutes earlier. All 650 missiles are already on the road. The man in charge gives them the manifest, and once Neagley and Dixon realize what has happened, they immediately take off after the truck. Out on the road, the truck driver spots what looks like a disabled vehicle and stops to help. The moment he gets out, one of AM's hijackers shoots him. The hijackers take control of the truck, and AM soon receives a call confirming that the missiles have been secured and are now on their way to New York. At the same time, Reacher and O'Donnell arrive at Homeland Security for a meeting arranged through Joe's old connections. They meet 2 DHS officers, Omar Karim and Hernandez. Omar explains that AM has appeared on their radar several times over the years, but they never had enough solid information to catch him. He also reveals that AM works with bearer bonds, the kind of financial instrument commonly used by tax evaders, criminals, and money launderers because they are hard to trace. According to Omar, AM is not just some random courier. He is the only person trusted to deliver his client's money. Reacher and O'Donnell share what they know, but when the DHS officers ask for more information in return, Reacher and O'Donnell hold back. They say they are still working their side of the case and will be in touch once it is finished. Meanwhile, Neagley and Dixon catch up to the missile truck, but the hijackers have already swapped containers and license plates. Once the hijackers realize the 2 women are investigators, they open fire. That gives the original truck driver a chance to escape. Neagley and Dixon fight back and take out the remaining hijackers. Before calling the cops to handle the bodies in the now empty truck, Neagley grabs the manifest from Dixon's car. That is when she finds something huge. She calls Reacher and O'Donnell with two major updates. First, the New Age truck carrying all 650 missiles has been hijacked. Second, Tony Swan is alive. Even worse, the manifest shows that Swan personally signed off on the shipment from New York. Reacher immediately refuses to believe Swan is corrupt. In his mind, New Age must have forged the signature. But Dixon pushes back, pointing out that New Age uses a full fingerprint and biometric scanning system. If that is true, it would be almost impossible for someone to fake Swan's approval or force it without his cooperation. Then O'Donnell asks the question no one wants to say out loud. When Reacher said he would kill everyone responsible for their friends' deaths, did that include Swan too? Reacher still will not accept it. To him, Swan being guilty makes no sense. He remembers their days in the 110th, when they were taking down a heroin ring, and Swan saved Reacher's life by taking 2 bullets for him. A man who did that for his friend would not suddenly turn around and help murder the rest of the team. Needing space, Reacher goes out for a walk to clear his head. But during that walk, Senator Lavey's agents, Silver and Hart, pull up beside him. They tell Reacher the senator has a proposal. Reacher gets into the car, and for some strange reason, the meeting takes place behind the primate exhibit at the Washington, D.C. Zoo. Lav tells Reacher he knows what happened in Margrave, including how Reacher destroyed a massive counterfeiting operation both literally and figuratively. Now Lav wants him to do the same thing again. This time the target is Little Wing. Lav wants the whole project burned down before it can ruin him. He helped push Little Wing through approval, and if the truth comes out, he could face criminal charges. Of course, Lav is not doing this out of honor. He wants to protect himself, protect his money, and walk away clean. He offers Reacher every resource he needs to bring down New Age and destroy Little Wing, while also making sure no one ever learns the 110th was involved. A few moments after Lav and his agents leave, Reacher receives a call from O'Donnell. France's body has finally been released, and the funeral is scheduled for tomorrow in New York. The next day, the surviving members of the 110th attend France's funeral. The mood is heavy, and for once, even Reacher seems quieter than usual. While everyone gathers to say goodbye, Reacher and O'Donnell notice Russo speaking with Angela and Mikey. He gives Mikey a toy and gently reassures Angela that he will look out for them, but Reacher is still suspicious. He pulls Russo aside and asks him a direct question. If Russo was the only person who knew the 110th would be at that steakhouse in Boston, then how did a biker gang know exactly where to ambush them? Russo fires back immediately. While Reacher was in Boston causing whatever chaos he caused, Russo was busy running background checks on New Age's top people, including Shane Langston, and what he found is not pretty. Almost every major figure connected to New Age security is a corrupt former cop, everyone except Swan. Swan is former military, not ex-police, but that does not clear him completely. At this point, he is still sitting right in the middle of the suspicion. The two men step away as the funeral service begins, but just as the firing squad prepares for the 21-gun salute, Reacher notices something across the road. 2 snipers, he warns everyone instantly. Russo rushes Angela and Mikey to safety, while the 110th moves fast to eliminate the threat. Neagley takes out 1 sniper, while Reacher goes after the second on foot. But even though Reacher is basically built like a tank, that size does not exactly make him a world-class sprinter. The shooter manages to reach his car before Reacher can catch him. Then Russo comes through at the perfect moment. He pulls up, gets Reacher inside, and the whole thing turns into a full-on car chase. As they pursue the shooter, Reacher begins to realize Russo might actually be clean. The problem may not be Russo himself, but someone inside his department leaking information. The chase finally ends when the shooter crashes his car. Reacher and Russo drag him out and interrogate him. Then the man drops a shocking piece of information. He says he does not even know who Langston is. According to him, the person who hired him was Swan. He also tells them he was supposed to meet Swan at an abandoned building in Queens to collect his payment. That night, the 110th and Russo set up a sting. They send the shooter into the building wearing a wire, hoping he can gather details about how many men are inside, where they are positioned, and what kind of weapons they have. But the moment he walks in, the entire building explodes. The blast kills their chance at answers and makes Swan look even guiltier. Afterward, the remaining members of the 110th cannot understand why Reacher still refuses to accept that Swan might be dirty. From the outside, every new clue seems to point directly at him. Russo arrives and confirms that Swan was not inside the building. The only body recovered was the shooter's. Then Russo receives another update. The address where Marlo abandoned her car has been found. The squad decides to go there immediately and track down the woman who led them into the trap. Russo stays behind, saying he has someone else he needs to talk to. When the team reaches the location, they find Marlo's car empty. They head into a nearby convenience store and check the security footage. On the CCTV, they see Marlo and her daughter Jane inside the store. Jane is playing on her Nintendo Switch, and that gives Neagley an idea. If they can get Jane's gamer tag, they might be able to trace her IP address and find out where Marlo is hiding. So the squad goes back to Marlo's house. There, they search for Jane's gaming information and wait for her to log in and start playing. While Neagley works on tracing the account, O'Donnell makes frozen pizza like this is somehow a normal evening, and Reacher heads upstairs to get some sleep. Dixon, however, has other plans. Meanwhile, Russo visits Drew Marsh, an NYPD lieutenant and his former supervisor. Russo corners him and demands answers. He wants to know how Langston knew Reacher and the 110th were in Boston when only Russo and Marsh had that information. Marsh finally breaks. He admits that Langston paid him a huge amount of money to keep an eye on Russo and warn him if Russo got too close to the truth. Marsh insists he only did it to protect himself, but Russo is disgusted. He hates corrupt cops more than almost anything, and now Marsh has become exactly the kind of officer Russo despises. Marsh tries to justify himself by bringing up Russo's father, saying he did not want to end up like him, buried 6 feet underground. In his mind, listening to Langston was the only way to survive, but Russo sees it for what it is. Marsh sold himself out. Russo loses every bit of respect he had left for the man and walks away furious. At least now he has the truth. Marsh was the leak who told Langston that Reacher was in Boston. Later, Neagley tells Reacher that she found Jane's IP address and has Marlo's location. It is about an hour away. Marlo has taken Jane to the house of her friend Chad. At Chad's place, the sprinklers suddenly turn on outside. Chad steps out to check what is happening, and that is when Reacher and the squad grab him. Reacher uses a plastic bottle as a makeshift silencer and threatens Chad, forcing him to call Marlo into the garage. The others can barely take the threat seriously because the homemade silencer looks ridiculous, but somehow Chad falls for it anyway. Once Marlo comes out, the truth finally starts coming together. Marlo explains that she had no idea the address she gave Neagley and Dixon was fake. Langston forced her to give it to them after he realized the 110th was closing in on him. She was not setting them up by choice. She was being threatened. Then she reveals the most important thing of all. Swan is clean. He had been trying to stop Langston's little wing operation from the inside. But one day, Swan suddenly disappeared. After that, Langston forced Marlo to hide what Swan had been investigating, threatening her, and using money to keep her quiet. What Swan discovered was the real scam behind Little Wing. The chips containing the missile guidance software were being marked as defective at an unusually high rate, but they were not actually defective. Langston's people were falsely labeling 650 working chips as bad, so they could secretly pull them out of the system and sell them to terrorists for an unbelievable amount of money. Marlo does not know the name of the engineer involved, but she does know one important detail. Before the deal is completed, that engineer has to personally demonstrate how the little wing chips are installed. That is enough for Reacher. He decides their next move is simple: get to Langston and force him to give up the engineer's name. At that same time, Langston is speaking with the engineer himself, Russell Johnson. Johnson assures him that when the client arrives, he will explain the entire chip installation process step by step. Everything is moving into place for the deal. Then Langston receives a call from Marlo. She sounds terrified and plays her part perfectly. She tells him that the 2 women who broke into his house are after her, along with their friends. Langston believes her immediately. He asks where she is and leaves with his men, pretending his priority is to protect Marlo and her daughter. Of course, the 110th is counting on exactly that. Before the trap is set, the team goes to Russo's place and asks him to take care of Jane while they use Marlo as bait. Russo also tells them what he found out from Marsh. Marsh confessed that he was on Langston's payroll, and he was the one who leaked Reacher's Boston location to the bikers. Russo agrees to protect Jane and decides to get out of town for a few days. His plan is to take her to Staten Island, far enough away to keep her safe, while the 110th handles Langston. The meeting point is an abandoned parking lot. Marlo stands alone in the open, while the 110th hides nearby, waiting for Langston to walk into the trap. But as Russo pulls out of his driveway with Jane, he notices a car following him. He speeds up and the men inside the other vehicle immediately open fire. Russo calls Reacher for help, and Marlo hears the call. That one moment ruins the entire setup. Langston realizes he has been baited. The abandoned parking lot explodes into gunfire as the 110th opens up on Langston's men. Neagley brings the team in, but Reacher tells her to go help Russo. He will stay behind and deal with Langston and his men himself. To trap them inside the lot, Reacher shoots out the tires on their vehicle. Then he turns the entire place into his hunting ground. One by one, he lures Langston's men into a bus and takes them apart. The way he deals with the last guy is pure Reacher, brutal, direct, and almost unfair. Meanwhile, Russo is still being chased, and eventually he gets boxed in with nowhere left to go. He steps out of his car and starts firing, doing everything he can to protect Jane. Back in the parking lot, Reacher takes a phone from one of Langston's men and calls the last number. The phone rings nearby, giving away Langston's position. Reacher starts moving toward him, but before he can reach him, a helicopter arrives to pull Langston out. A gunman inside the chopper opens fire, forcing Reacher behind cover. Langston escapes once again. Russo tells Jane to run and not look back. He knows exactly what kind of situation he is in, and he chooses to stand his ground. He leaves cover and takes down the attackers coming for them, but in the process, he is hit badly. Jane manages to get away, but when the gunfire stops, she cannot help herself. She looks back and sees Russ on the ground. Then she turns forward again and sees one last gunman moving toward her. Before he can do anything, Neagley slams into him with a car. The 110th reunites Marlowe with her daughter, but the victory is short-lived. Neagley rushes to Russo, who is barely hanging on. He weakly asks about Jane, and Neagley tells him she is safe. As Russo's life begins to fade, he reaches out with a bloody hand. Neagley, who hates physical contact more than almost anything, takes his hand anyway. She rests his head in her lap and stays with him while they wait for help, but help does not arrive in time. Russo dies there, and the loss hits harder, because he had finally proven himself to be one of the good ones. Now the 110th needs a safe place for Marlowe and Jane. The problem is that almost everyone Reacher trusts is already tangled up in the case. Even Finlay is involved all the way up in Boston. Dixon remembers someone. After the 110th was shut down, she worked in-house for a debt collection company in Buffalo. During that time, she rented an apartment from a landlord named Bob Lee, a retired firefighter she trusts completely. If anyone can hide Marlowe and Jane without asking too many questions, it is Bob. So O'Donnell and Dixon take responsibility for getting mother and daughter safely on their way to Buffalo. Meanwhile, Reacher and Neagley decide to pay Marsh a visit. They arrive at Marsh's home, but Neagley stays in the car. She is angry over Russo's death, and if things go wrong inside, she wants to be ready. Reacher goes in alone and gives Marsh two choices: turn himself in or die right there. Marsh, making possibly the worst decision of his life, reaches for his gun. Reacher reacts instantly, kicking the desk into him and pinning him hard against the wall. Reacher questions him about Little Wing and AM, but Marsh does not know much. Langston kept him out of the deeper parts of the operation. Still, the pain eventually breaks him. Marsh tells Reacher that Grant, the man they ran over the night before, would know what he wants. And here comes the twist: Grant is not dead. He is alive and being treated in intensive care at Mount Sinai. Reacher gets the information he came for, but Marsh tries once again to grab his weapon. This time, Reacher does not give him a third chance. He shoots Marsh in the head. With that handled, Reacher and Neagley head for Mount Sinai. At the Jade East Motel, O'Donnell and Dixon make sure Marlowe and Jane safely begin their trip to Buffalo. Once the two are gone, Dixon turns to O'Donnell and reminds him that he is the only one among them with a real family waiting for him. The stakes are getting worse, and if he wants to walk away before this gets even bloodier, now is the moment. But honestly, she already knows the answer. O'Donnell is not leaving. Not now. Not after everything they have lost. The story then shifts into how the 110th was disbanded in the first place. Back in their military days, Lieutenant Colonel Hortense Fields ordered Reacher to shut down Operation Kite Runner. But Reacher was not exactly the type to obey an order just because it came from someone with a higher rank. Operation Kite Runner had been the 110th's longest-running case, and Reacher was not ready to drop it just because someone wanted it buried. Operation Kite Runner had taken more than 2 years of work. The 110th had been chasing a huge drug operation running across America, and the worst part was that people inside the military were involved in it too. Lieutenant Colonel Fields ordered Reacher to shut the whole thing down because exposing it would damage the reputation of the command. But Reacher did not care about protecting anyone's image. He cared about the truth, the victims, and the job his unit was supposed to do. The argument between Reacher and Fields gets intense, but eventually, Reacher appears to back down. At least, that is what Fields thinks. Later, Reacher decides he cannot walk away from the case, not after everything they had uncovered, not when they were so close to taking down the people responsible. So he gathers the members of the 110th and tells them the situation. A heroin deal is about to happen during the training holidays on abandoned military-owned land, about 5 kilometers north of their base. Reacher gives the team a choice. They can step away with their heads held high, knowing they followed orders, or they can finish the case and do what they all know is right. Everyone understands the risk. Defying a direct order could destroy their careers. They might get discharged or worse, end up punished so badly that getting fired would feel like the easy version. But despite all that, not one member of the 110th walks away. They choose the mission. That night, the 110th Special Investigations Unit moves onto the abandoned base and spots 3 soldiers, Hughes, Say, and Molnar. The 3 men are waiting for their buyers. Reacher and his team surround them and begin searching the vehicles, trying to find where the heroin is hidden. At first, they come up empty, and frustration starts to build. Then Reacher notices something unusual on one of the spare tires mounted behind a vehicle. There is a patch that looks out of place. He borrows O'Donnell's switchblade, cuts into it, and finds exactly what they were looking for: heroin. They check the other spare tires and find the same hidden compartments. Just as they arrest the 3 soldiers, the buyers arrive in 3 vans. The situation instantly turns into a shootout between the drug ring and the 110th. The team fights back, arrests Hughes, and brings the whole operation down. Operation Kite Runner is finally over, but so are their military careers. Later, while the team is packing up their office, Swan pulls out his guitar and starts playing. For one brief moment, everyone joins in, and the mood feels almost peaceful, like they are choosing to celebrate what they accomplished instead of mourning what they lost. Then Field storms in, absolutely furious, and kills the moment. He officially announces that the 110th Special Investigations Unit is disbanded, effective immediately. But even then, the unit does not really regret what they did. They were never about protecting careers or pleasing higher-ups. They were about doing the right thing, exactly the way Reacher taught them. Back in the present, Reacher and Neagley disguise themselves as nurses and enter Mount Sinai, where Grant is being treated. They make their way into his room and use a very direct interrogation method to get him talking. And by direct, of course, we mean torture. Grant finally reveals that Langston is meeting the buyer tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock a.m. He claims that is all he knows, but Reacher is not interested in leaving loose ends behind. Reacher points out that the hospital security footage could become a problem. Cameras will show him and Neagley entering Grant's room, which means Grant being alive could later expose them. But if Grant dies from something that looks like a medical complication, especially after a serious car crash, nobody will think too hard about it. So Reacher kills Grant, avenging Russo in the process, and he and Neagley leave the room. But as they are heading out, they spot a suspicious doctor. It quickly becomes clear that this man is not really a doctor at all. He is another assassin sent by Langston to kill Grant, because Langston clearly does not like leaving anyone alive who might talk. Reacher and Neagley chase the fake doctor through the hospital, but he manages to slip away for a moment, forcing them to split up. With Reacher's help, Neagley eventually takes him down. They search him and find a burner phone. Reacher uses it to call Langston. He tells Langston that he is down another man, but Langston has his own surprise ready. He reveals that he has captured 2 of Reacher's people, O'Donnell and Dixon. They are being held at New Age's Research and Development Facility in Rockland. Reacher immediately lies and tells Langston that the assassin killed Neagley, making it sound like he is the only one left. Langston then gives him an offer. Reacher must surrender his weapon and stay under watch by Langston's men until the transaction is finished. After that, Langston claims he will release Reacher and his friends. Obviously, Reacher does not believe a word of it, but he agrees to meet later that night. Next, Reacher calls Lav and asks if the senator is still willing to provide the resources needed to bring down Little Wing. Lav agrees to send 2 SEALs and 1 Army Ranger to help him, but that is not the only thing Reacher asks for. Outside the New Age R&D facility, Reacher studies the employee list and removes a pin from it. He already knows Langston is planning to kill him once he is inside, but there is no chance Reacher is walking in without a plan. Neagley observes the facility and sees how tight the security is. Then, almost by accident, a group of drunk kids shows up nearby, blasting music, mocking the guards, and causing trouble. One of them throws a beer can at the fence, and when it hits, sparks reveal that the fence is electrified. That gives Reacher an idea. Meanwhile, AM meets with the truck hijacker and confirms that the missiles are real. The deal is almost ready. Inside the New Age facility, Langston's men torture O'Donnell and Dixon the same way they tortured France. They are trying to break them, but they clearly do not understand what kind of people the 110th are. Back outside, Reacher sits in the car with Neagley, preparing to go in. Before he leaves, Neagley stops him. She tells him she's been thinking about Operation Kite Runner, about how they all knew it was a losing fight but still chose to do it anyway. She admits she thinks they might die tonight. Reacher does not give her some long emotional speech. He simply tells her that he has his best soldier watching his back, so he is not worried. With the planning finished and the pieces in place, it is finally time to move. Reacher steps out of the car and walks toward the main gate of the New Age facility. At the entrance, Langston's men take his weapon. But taking Reacher's gun has never meant taking away the danger. Langston arrives, and his men wheel out O'Donnell and Dixon on gurneys, proving they are still alive. That is the only good news in the room. Because at this point, Langston has pushed Reacher past every possible limit. Honestly, God might have mercy on Langston. Reacher definitely will not. With his hands cuffed, Reacher is escorted deeper into the facility. Langston's plan is simple and cruel. He wants to load Reacher, O'Donnell, and Dixon onto his helicopter and throw them out the same way he killed France, Sanchez, and Orozco. But when they try to force Reacher onto a gurney, he refuses. Even with his hands tied, he starts fighting back, taking shots, throwing kicks, and making it clear that restraining Reacher does not make him helpless. Then Langston receives another update. Neagley's body was never found. That makes him furious. He demands that Reacher tell him where she is, because as far as Langston is concerned, Neagley is the final loose end. Reacher says nothing. Outside the facility, Neagley is very much alive. She silently takes out 2 guards, then checks in with Lavai's men, asking when they are landing. Inside, Langston's men continue beating Reacher, trying to force Neagley's location out of him. Langston also reveals what happened with Swan. He says he offered Swan a deal, but Swan refused. Swan was too loyal, too stubborn, and too determined to shut the whole operation down. When Reacher asks where Swan is, Langston walks to a drawer and pulls out a preservation jar containing Swan's identifiers. The truth is ugly. Langston explains that he only needed Swan's fingerprints and iris to make it look like Swan had approved all the shipments and signed off on the documents. That is how they framed him, that is how they used his identity, and that is why Swan never came home, not even for his dog. Reacher was right all along. Tony Swan was not a traitor. The only reason he would have abandoned his dog was if he was physically unable to return. Reacher did not recruit some weak, corrupt sellout into the 110th. Swan was clean. Langston orders his men to load O'Donnell and Dixon onto the helicopter first, then come back for Reacher. Outside, Neagley sees Lavai's men landing near the facility. But she also sees O'Donnell and Dixon being taken toward the chopper. Time is running out. Back inside, Reacher uses the small pin he took from the employee board earlier and starts working on his cuffs. Meanwhile, Langston and his men begin destroying evidence, trying to wipe out anything that could connect them to Little Wing. Then loud music suddenly blasts from outside. Neagley, posing as one of the drunk troublemakers from earlier, cranks up the volume from her car. At the same time, Lavai's men cut the power to the building, forcing the facility onto backup mode. A guard steps outside to tell Neagley to shut the music off. She shoots him. At the same moment, Lavai's team storms the main entrance and starts taking out Langston's men. Neagley moves inside and provides cover while Reacher frees himself completely from the cuffs. Then Reacher spots Langston running for the helicopter. He tells Neagley to cover him and sprints after it. The chopper starts lifting off, but Reacher barely reaches it in time, grabbing onto the landing gear as it rises into the air. High above the Catskill Mountains, Langston orders Parker to open the rear doors. He decides Dixon will be the first one thrown out, but opening the doors gives Reacher exactly the chance he needs. He climbs into the helicopter and becomes Langston's worst nightmare one last time. The fight inside the chopper turns chaotic. Reacher gets stabbed in the arm with a switchblade, and gunfire erupts inside the cabin. The pilot struggles to keep control as the helicopter jerks violently through the air. The sudden tilt sends Dixon's gurney sliding toward the open door. Reacher grabs her just in time, stopping her from falling out. While dangling near the edge, Dixon manages to free herself from the gurney. Then she pulls the blade out of Reacher's arm and uses it to take down Parker. Now Langston is the last enemy standing. Dixon forces the pilot to keep the helicopter steady, and Reacher turns his full attention to Langston. This is the moment everyone has been waiting for. Reacher grabs Langston by the leg and drags him toward the open door. Langston panics and starts begging, promising to tell Reacher where the buyer meeting is happening. But Reacher does not bite. He He tells Langston that he is assuming Reacher needs that information, and in an investigation, assumptions kill. Then Langston gets exactly what he gave France, Sanchez, and Orozco. Reacher throws him out of the helicopter, sending him falling to his death. Afterward, the pilot tells them that the buyer is meeting the engineer, the man responsible for explaining how to install the little wing missile chips. Meanwhile, AM and the truck hijacker arrive at the engineer's house. But Neagley is already waiting. She takes out the hijacker, and Reacher steps into view with a gun pointed straight at AM. AM tries to act innocent at first, pretending he does not know what Reacher is talking about. But Reacher asks him who he is selling the weapons to. AM smugly refuses to answer, saying that revealing his client would destroy his reputation and his business. The man is still acting like he is in control, completely unaware that his business career ended the second he crossed paths with the 110th. As AM keeps talking, Reacher and the others gun him down, filling him with bullets before he can say anything else. Neagley grabs one of the missiles fitted with the little wing chip, and the squad heads to the barn, where the pilot and the engineer are tied up. Reacher decides to let them go. They board the helicopter and take off. But there is still one thing left to do. They need to test Little Wing. Neagley takes aim and waits until the helicopter flies out over the river. Then she fires. Just like the documents described, Little Wing works perfectly. The missile seems to miss at first, then corrects itself and strikes the helicopter from above, destroying it in midair. For a second, it looks like the mission is finally over. But then Lavey's men turn their rifles on Reacher and the surviving members of the 110th. They tell them the senator cannot risk any leaks. In other words, Lavey planned to use them and then erase them. What they do not know is that Reacher already expected this. He was one step ahead the entire time. He had already called Omar Karim. Omar and his Homeland Security team arrive at the barn, arresting Lavey's men and taking control of the scene. Lavey's cleanup plan collapses before it can even begin, and Reacher lets the authorities handle the rest. The 110th walks away with another job finished and $65 million in bearer bonds now in their possession. Later, the squad sits together in a diner, ordering food and talking about what should happen to the money. Dixon suggests they use it to help the people hurt by everything that happened, and that is exactly what Reacher does. Now that the money is in his hands, he does not waste it on himself. Instead, he makes sure it goes to the people who paid the heaviest price. He sends huge amounts to Angela, to Russo's brother, to Milna, and to Orozco's sister. Each transfer is his way of taking care of the families and loved ones left behind. He also makes a massive donation to an animal shelter in the names of Swan and his dog, Macy. It is a quiet but meaningful tribute, because Reacher never forgot that Swan would never have abandoned his dog unless something terrible had happened to him. Then he sets aside money for Neagley, for her father, for O'Donnell's kids, and for Dixon. Reacher may not say much about feelings, but the way he divides the money says everything. He is making sure the people connected to the 110th are looked after. That night, the remaining members of the team sit together one last time. They raise their bottles to the friends they lost: France, Sanchez, Orozco, Swan, Lowry, and everyone else whose absence is felt more than spoken. The moment is bittersweet. The mission is over, the bad guys are gone, and justice has been served, but the cost was brutal. Still, for a little while, they try to hold on to what they still have. Before the night ends, they take one final group photo together. It is not the same as the old 110th photo, because too many people are missing now, but it still matters. It is proof that even after everything, the bond between them survived. The next morning, Dixon returns to the motel and wakes Reacher up with a gift, a toothbrush. After everything they have been through, it is almost funny, because Reacher had been weirdly serious about needing one. Dixon tells him she has to leave for the airport, and that she is sharing a ride with O'Donnell. Neither of them makes the goodbye bigger than it has to be, but there is still weight behind it. Before they part ways, maybe for a long time, Reacher and Dixon share one last kiss. Then O'Donnell and Dixon leave. After that, it is Reacher and Neagley's turn to say goodbye. Dixon had told Reacher to use at least some of the money for himself, so he actually does. But because he is Reacher, he does not buy a house, a car, or anything normal. He buys a Trailways pass that gives him unlimited bus travel across America for a full year. For Reacher, that is basically luxury. Neagley, who has never been the sentimental type, still lets him know how she feels in her own way. She tells him she hates that they go so long without speaking, only reconnecting when someone is dead or some deadly mission pulls them back together. She tells him he needs to get better at staying in touch. Before she walks away, she says one more thing. Reacher always calls the 110th his soldiers or his friends, but both of them know the truth. They are more than that. They are family. Finally, Reacher boards the bus, ready to disappear into the next road, the next town, and whatever comes after. An old man sitting nearby asks him what he was doing in New York. Reacher keeps it simple. He says he was visiting family. Then the old man asks where he is headed next, and in the most Reacher answer possible, he says he has no idea. The weird thing about Reacher Season 2 is that it does not look smaller than Season 1. It actually looks bigger in almost every obvious way. More locations, more characters, more action, more gunfire, more history from Reacher's past. On paper, that sounds like the natural upgrade a second season should have. But while Season 1 felt simple in the right way, Season 2 often feels bigger in the wrong way. Season 1 worked because it had a clean hook. Reacher walks into a small town, gets pulled into a murder case, and slowly starts breaking open the corruption hiding underneath. It was not the most original setup in the world, but it had focus. You knew where you were. You knew what kind of story you were watching, and because everything was trapped inside Margrave, the pressure felt tighter. Season 2 tries to expand the world, and that is not a bad idea. Moving beyond one town gives the show more movement and more scale, but it also loses that locked-in feeling. The first season had a rough, contained energy. Season 2 has more pieces on the board, yet somehow less impact. That is probably the biggest difference. Season 1 had charm. It had a little humor, some grit, and enough mystery to keep you going. Season 2 still has Reacher smashing through people, but the personality is not as strong. It feels more like a regular action show at times, just with a much bigger lead actor standing in the middle of it. And I think that is why the comparison hurts. Season 1 did not need to be perfect. It just needed to make Reacher feel dangerous, smart, and entertaining. Most of the time, it did that. Season 2 has the same character, the same physical presence, and a larger story, but it does not carry the same sharpness. So yes, Season 2 is louder, it is busier, it tries to raise the stakes, but Season 1 had something that is harder to fake, momentum that felt natural. Season 2 gives you more, but it does not always give you better. And for a show built around a character as direct as Jack Reacher, that difference matters. If there is one complaint that kept coming up while watching Reacher Season 2, it's that the show doesn't feel like itself anymore. Not because the characters suddenly changed beyond recognition, or because the production quality dropped, but because the overall vibe is different. That edge that made the first season so addictive just isn't as sharp this time. Season 1 had a confidence about it. It wasn't trying to overwhelm you with constant spectacle. It mixed hard-hitting action with dry humor, tense investigations, and those quiet moments where Reacher could walk into a room and completely control it without saying much. Even when nothing was exploding, there was still a feeling that something interesting was about to happen. Season 2 doesn't quite have that balance. The action is still there, maybe even more than before, but more action doesn't automatically create more excitement. After a while, the shootouts, fistfights, and chases start blending together. Instead of building anticipation, they become expected. You stop wondering what's going to happen and start waiting for the next fight because you know it's coming. Another thing that feels different is the tone. The first season had a rough sense of humor that came naturally through Reacher's personality and the people around him. It never tried too hard to be funny. In Season 2, that effortless charm isn't nearly as noticeable. The dialogue feels more functional, the interactions are less memorable, and the series spends so much time moving from one mission to another that it forgets to let the characters simply exist. The intensity also takes a hit. In a good thriller, every decision should feel like it matters. Every confrontation should carry some uncertainty. Here, that feeling slowly fades. Reacher is still unstoppable, but because he seems to overcome almost every obstacle with ease, the tension begins to disappear. The danger doesn't feel as dangerous when you already know who's walking away from every fight. That doesn't mean the season is boring, far from it. There are still entertaining moments scattered throughout, and Alan Ritchson's presence alone keeps many scenes engaging. But entertainment and excitement aren't always the same thing. The first season managed to create both. Season 2 mostly settles for entertainment. Maybe that's why so many people describe the second season as missing its magic. It's difficult to point to one specific scene and say, this is where it all went wrong. Instead, it's a gradual realization. Episode after episode, you start noticing that the suspense isn't gripping you the same way, the humor isn't landing as often, and the emotional investment isn't as strong. By the end of the season, the biggest difference isn't the story or even the action. It's the feeling. Season 1 made you eager to jump into the next episode because you genuinely wanted to know what Reacher would do next. Season 2 still encourages you to keep watching, but more out of curiosity than excitement. Sometimes the smallest change in atmosphere makes the biggest difference, and that's exactly what happened here. One of the first things you notice about Reacher Season 2 is that it isn't trying to repeat the formula of the first season. Instead of keeping everything contained within one small town, the story opens up. The investigation stretches across multiple cities, the stakes feel larger, and the world around Reacher suddenly seems much bigger. On paper, that sounds like exactly what a second season should do. And to be fair, there are moments where it genuinely works. Shifting between different locations gives the story a fresh visual identity. You're no longer spending every episode in the same streets, talking to the same people, or circling the same mystery. The constant movement makes it feel like Reacher is chasing something much larger than a local conspiracy. It also fits the character. Reacher has never been someone who stays in one place for long. He's always moving, always passing through, and Season 2 embraces that part of his personality much more than before. Watching him travel from one location to another feels natural, because that's exactly how this character has always lived. But there's a trade-off. Season 1 benefited from being confined to a single town. Every new clue, every suspect, and every confrontation felt connected because they all belonged to the same environment. The mystery slowly tightened around everyone involved, creating a constant sense of pressure. The town itself almost became another character. Season 2 loses some of that. As the story keeps moving, that feeling of being trapped inside one dangerous situation starts to disappear. New places bring new faces, new subplots, and new pieces of information, but they also make the narrative feel more spread out. Instead of one tightly connected mystery, the season often feels like it's jumping between different objectives before you've fully settled into the previous one. That's not necessarily a flaw, it just changes the experience. Some viewers will probably enjoy the larger scope because it makes the season feel more cinematic. Bigger locations naturally allow for bigger action scenes, larger operations, and a wider cast of characters. It gives the impression that Reacher is dealing with threats on a much broader scale than before. Others, though, may miss the simplicity of Season 1. There was something satisfying about watching one mystery slowly unravel inside one community. It felt focused. Every episode pushed the same central investigation forward without constantly expanding the playing field. Season 2 chooses ambition over intimacy. It wants the world to feel bigger, and in many ways it succeeds. The scenery changes more often, the mission covers more ground, and the story rarely stands still. Whether that's actually an improvement depends on what you liked most about the first season. If you wanted Reacher operating on a larger stage, this season delivers exactly that. But if the appeal was the tight, contained storytelling that made every clue feel important, the wider scope may end up feeling less engaging than expected. Sometimes making a story bigger also makes it feel a little less personal, and that's a balance Season 2 doesn't always get right. If there's one area where Reacher Season 2 feels noticeably different, it's the pacing. Right from the opening episodes, the show wastes very little time getting the story moving. New clues appear quickly, the team is constantly on the move, and there's almost always another fight, chase, or investigation waiting around the corner. At first, that works in the show's favor. The season feels more energetic than before. It doesn't spend as much time setting the stage, and the central conflict is introduced much earlier. Instead of slowly building toward the bigger picture, the story pushes forward almost immediately, giving the impression that everything is urgent. But after a few episodes, the pacing starts to become a little inconsistent. The strange thing is that the season is both fast and slow at the same time. Major events happen one after another, yet the overall story doesn't always feel like it's making meaningful progress. Characters travel constantly, gather clues, confront enemies, and move to the next location, but some of those moments don't leave much of an impact once they're over. It creates a rhythm that can feel uneven. Some episodes race through important developments, while others seem to stall with conversations or action sequences that don't really add much to the bigger picture. Instead of building momentum naturally, the season occasionally feels like it's alternating between rushing ahead and treading water. That also affects the suspense. A good thriller knows when to slow down. Those quieter moments give the audience time to absorb new information, question what's coming next, and let the tension build on its own. Season 2 rarely allows itself to breathe for very long. It often jumps straight from one objective to the next, and because of that, some emotional beats and story revelations don't land as strongly as they could have. Ironically, the faster pace sometimes makes the season feel longer. When almost every episode follows a similar cycle of investigation, confrontation, action, and relocation, the structure becomes predictable. You never feel bored because nothing is happening, but you also don't get many moments where the story genuinely surprises you or changes its rhythm. That's not to say the pacing is bad from beginning to end. There are stretches where everything clicks together, especially when the investigation and the action are working toward the same goal. During those moments, the season has a real sense of momentum. The problem is consistency. Season 2 is always moving, but constant movement isn't the same as steady storytelling. The pace keeps the episodes easy to watch, yet it doesn't always give the narrative enough room to build suspense, develop its ideas, or make the biggest moments feel earned. By the end, you realize the season wasn't lacking speed, it was lacking balance. One thing that stood out to me as the season progressed was how much more complicated the story tried to become. Not necessarily deeper, just more complicated. The first season had a mystery that was easy to follow. It introduced new pieces gradually, and every clue felt like it belonged to the same puzzle. You always had a clear sense of what Reacher was trying to uncover and why it mattered. Season 2 takes a different approach. The investigation grows much faster, pulling in more characters, more locations, and more moving parts almost immediately. At first, that makes the story feel larger and more ambitious. It gives the impression that Reacher is dealing with a case that reaches far beyond a single crime. But as more layers are added, the narrative starts working against itself. Instead of making the mystery more engaging, some of the extra plot threads make it harder to stay invested. New information arrives so frequently that certain developments don't have enough time to sink in before the story has already shifted to the next objective. There's also a tendency to over-explain certain things while rushing through others. Some conversations spend a lot of time discussing plans, theories, or investigations, yet the emotional weight behind those discoveries doesn't always land. You understand what's happening, but you don't necessarily feel the impact. That affects the overall flow. Rather than feeling like one tightly connected investigation, the season often feels like several smaller missions linked together. Reacher and his team solve one problem, move somewhere else, uncover another clue, and repeat the process. Individually, many of those moments are entertaining, but together they don't always create the same satisfying momentum that the first season managed to maintain. Ironically, the larger scope sometimes makes the story feel less focused. Instead of building tension through simplicity, the season keeps introducing new elements, almost as if it's afraid to slow down. More suspects, more operations, more confrontations, more twists. None of these are bad ideas on their own, but eventually the narrative begins carrying more weight than it really needs. That's why some viewers describe Season 2 as feeling unnecessarily busy. It's not that the story is impossible to follow. It isn't. It's that the constant expansion doesn't always make the mystery more interesting. Sometimes the strongest thrillers know exactly what to leave out. Season 2 often chooses to add another layer instead. The result is a season that remains entertaining from episode to episode, but occasionally loses the clean, focused storytelling that made the first season so easy to get invested in. Bigger doesn't always mean better, and this is one of those cases where a little more restraint might have made the overall story even stronger. One area where Reacher Season 2 actually improves over the first season is how it introduces its villains. Instead of keeping the audience in the dark for most of the story, the people behind the conflict are established much earlier, giving the investigation a much clearer direction from the beginning. That immediately changes the feel of the season. In Season 1, part of the appeal came from not knowing exactly who was pulling the strings. The mystery unfolded piece by piece, and the villains stayed hidden long enough to keep you guessing. Season 2 takes a different route. It lets you know much sooner who Reacher is up against and what kind of threat they're dealing with. There's an advantage to that approach. Because the antagonists are introduced earlier, the story spends less time asking, who is responsible, and more time asking, how are they going to stop them? That shift gives the investigation a stronger sense of purpose. Reacher isn't wandering from clue to clue hoping to find the enemy. He already has a target, and the focus becomes figuring out how to bring them down. It also helps establish the stakes earlier. You get a better understanding of what the villains want, how far they're willing to go, and why they're dangerous. That clarity keeps the plot moving and prevents the early episodes from feeling like they're simply buying time before the real story begins. At least in theory, because while the season does a better job introducing its villains, simply revealing them earlier doesn't automatically make them more memorable. Knowing who the bad guys are is one thing. Feeling genuinely invested in them is something else entirely. Still, the earlier setup gives Season 2 a more confident opening. The show doesn't spend half the season hiding information just for the sake of creating mystery. Instead, it puts the central conflict on the table relatively quickly and allows the investigation to grow around it. It's a different storytelling approach from Season 1, and in many ways, it's a welcome one. The audience spends less time wondering where the story is going and more time watching Reacher work toward a clear objective. Whether the villains ultimately live up to that early promise is another discussion altogether. But when it comes to setting the conflict in motion, Season 2 gets off to a stronger and more focused start than many people give it credit for. While Season 2 does a better job introducing its villains early, it struggles with something far more important, making them memorable by the time the story reaches its conclusion. That's a little surprising because the setup is actually promising. Early on, the antagonists are presented as organized, dangerous, and capable of staying one step ahead. They have clear motives, resources, and enough influence to make it feel like Reacher is facing a genuine challenge. For a while, the balance between the hero and the villains feels fairly even, but that momentum slowly fades. As the season moves forward, many of the villains stop developing. Instead of becoming more intimidating, they begin serving the plot rather than driving it. They remain obstacles for Reacher to overcome, but very few of them leave a lasting impression as characters. Even the main antagonist never quite reaches the level of presence you'd expect after so much build-up. The season spends plenty of time establishing the threat, yet when everything finally comes together, the payoff feels smaller than the setup suggested. Some supporting villains have moments where they stand out, and there are performances that add personality to individual scenes, but those moments are brief. Once they're gone, there's very little that sticks with you. Another issue is that the villains don't always feel as unpredictable as they should. A strong thriller benefits from an opponent who can genuinely challenge the hero, forcing them to adapt and think differently. Here, despite the danger they create, it rarely feels like they're capable of shifting the balance for very long. That also affects the tension. When the audience starts believing that Reacher will outplay every opponent without much difficulty, the villains naturally become less threatening. Instead of wondering whether he'll succeed, the question becomes how long it will take before he wins. That's a very different kind of suspense, and it's not nearly as compelling. There's also a sense that a few antagonists had more potential than the script allowed them to explore. They arrive with interesting introductions, hint at larger roles, and then don't contribute as much as expected once the story reaches its final stretch. So while Season 2 deserves credit for bringing its villains into the story earlier, it doesn't quite capitalize on that advantage. The foundation is there, but the execution doesn't fully deliver. By the finale, you remember Reacher's victories far more than the people he defeated, and for an action thriller, that's a missed opportunity. Great heroes become even more memorable when they're matched against equally memorable villains. Season 2 gives Reacher plenty of enemies, but not enough of them feel worthy of being remembered once the credits roll. One of the biggest changes in Season 2 is that Reacher is no longer solving everything on his own. This time, he's reunited with members of his old Special Investigators unit, and that completely changes the dynamic of the series. It's an interesting direction. Instead of watching a lone drifter walk into an unfamiliar town, we're seeing someone surrounded by people who already know exactly who he is. There are no long introductions, no need to earn each other's trust, and very little time spent figuring out personalities. These characters already share history, and the show expects you to feel that connection almost immediately. In many ways, it works. The team gives us a glimpse into Reacher's military life, something the first season could only hint at. You get to see how he operates around people who once served under him, how they communicate without saying much, and why they continue to respect him long after leaving the military. It adds another layer to his character without needing lengthy flashbacks or exposition. The teamwork also changes the investigation itself. Instead of Reacher doing everything personally, responsibilities are divided. Different members follow different leads, gather information from multiple places, and cover more ground than one person ever could. That naturally makes the story feel larger and allows several investigations to happen at the same time. But this approach also changes the identity of the show. Season 1 felt like one man taking on an entire town. Season 2 often feels like a group operation. Reacher is still clearly the leader, but he no longer carries every scene on his own. The spotlight is shared much more than before. Whether that's a good thing really depends on what you're looking for. If you've wanted to see more of Reacher's past and understand the people who shaped his military career, this season offers exactly that. The relationships feel established, the loyalty is believable, and the chemistry between the team helps explain why these investigators were once considered elite. On the other hand, viewers who loved the lone wolf nature of the first season may find this change a little less satisfying. Part of Reacher's appeal has always been watching him rely on his own instincts, make decisions independently, and quietly outthink everyone around him. Sharing that responsibility with an entire team inevitably changes the rhythm. That doesn't make the concept wrong. It simply gives Season 2 a different personality. Rather than following one unstoppable drifter, the show becomes more of a military reunion built around a shared mission. It's a fresh direction for the series, and at times it genuinely adds depth to Reacher's world. The only question is whether that added depth is enough to replace the unique simplicity that made his solo adventures so compelling in the first place. While bringing back Reacher's old military team adds a new dimension to the story, it also creates one of Season 2's biggest problems. It spreads the spotlight a little too thin. The first season had a very simple formula. Almost everything revolved around Reacher. Even when other characters played important roles, the story always felt like it was moving through his perspective. He was the center of every major decision, every investigation, and every confrontation. Season 2 feels different. Now there are multiple investigators, each with their own role, personality, and storyline. The intention is understandable. A team naturally allows the investigation to cover more ground, split into different missions, and tackle several problems at once. But it comes at a cost. Instead of making the story feel richer, the larger cast sometimes makes it feel busier. Episodes jump between different characters and parallel missions so often that Reacher occasionally feels like just one member of the group rather than the driving force behind it. That shift changes the overall experience. One of the reasons Reacher stood out in the first place was because he felt unpredictable. He could walk into any situation alone and completely change the balance of power. Every scene carried a certain curiosity because you wanted to see how he would solve the problem using his own instincts. With a full team around him, that uniqueness becomes less noticeable. Information is shared between several characters. Plans are discussed collectively. Different people handle different parts of the mission. It's a more practical approach, but it also removes some of the mystery that naturally surrounded Reacher when he worked independently. The supporting characters aren't necessarily the issue. In fact, several of them have enjoyable moments and believable chemistry with one another. The problem is simply that there are so many moving pieces competing for attention that the story occasionally loses its focus. There are also moments where conversations between team members slow the momentum instead of building it. Instead of following one clear line of investigation, the narrative keeps switching perspectives, making the season feel more fragmented than the first. Ironically, the team is supposed to make Reacher stronger. Instead, it sometimes makes him feel smaller, not because he's less capable, but because he no longer dominates the story the way he once did. The more time the series spends dividing attention among multiple characters, the less room it has to highlight what makes Reacher such a compelling lead. That's why some viewers feel the season is overcrowded. It's not that the team lacks chemistry or purpose. It's that the show occasionally forgets who the audience came to watch. The best moments still happen when Reacher takes control of the situation, trusts his own instincts, and reminds everyone why he's the most dangerous person in the room. Those moments are still here. There just aren't quite enough of them. One of the biggest debates surrounding Season 2 isn't about the action or the mystery. It's about Jack Reacher himself. Does this character actually work better with a team? After watching the season, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Reacher has always been at his best when he's completely on his own. That's not because he can't work with other people. Quite the opposite. The series makes it clear that he's a respected leader, someone his former teammates trust without hesitation. They know his instincts, they understand how he thinks, and there's a believable sense of loyalty between them. But that's not what makes Reacher interesting. What makes him stand out is his independence. He's the kind of character who arrives with nothing but a toothbrush, walks into a place he's never seen before, and somehow uncovers everything that's wrong with it. He doesn't rely on connections, resources, or backup. He observes, he adapts, and he solves problems in his own way. Season 2 changes that formula. For much of the story, Reacher is surrounded by people who already know him. They're constantly exchanging information, dividing responsibilities, and working toward the same objective. It's efficient, but it also makes him feel less unique than he did before. Some of the most memorable moments in Season 1 came from watching Reacher think his way through situations completely alone. He didn't have anyone feeding him information or helping him connect the dots. Every breakthrough felt like it belonged entirely to him. That sense of isolation added tension. If Reacher made a mistake, there was no one else to fix it. If he walked into danger, he had to find his own way out. The audience wasn't just watching a mystery unfold. They were watching one man figure everything out using his experience and instincts. Season 2 naturally loses some of that because the responsibility is shared. Whenever the team splits up, different members contribute different pieces of the investigation. That's realistic for a military unit, but it also means Reacher doesn't always feel like the one carrying the story forward on his own. It's interesting because the show never suggests that the team is holding him back. In fact, they're highly capable and often useful. The issue is much simpler than that. The more people you place around a character whose greatest strength is self-reliance, the less that defining quality stands out. That's why so many viewers still prefer the lone wolf version of Reacher. It's not nostalgia for season 1. It's the realization that this character has a very specific appeal. Watching him walk into an unfamiliar situation with no plan except trusting his own judgment is part of what makes him so entertaining. Season 2 proves that Reacher can function as part of a team. It just doesn't prove that he's better because of it. If anything, it reminds you how compelling he is when he's forced to rely on no one but himself. If there's one thing that almost everyone seems to agree on, it's that Alan Ritchson looks exactly how Jack Reacher was always imagined. The moment he walks onto the screen, you understand why he was cast. He's massive, intimidating, and has the kind of physical presence that immediately changes the atmosphere of every scene. He doesn't need to say much. Half the time, just seeing him standing there is enough to make everyone else look nervous, and that's incredibly important for this character. Reacher has never been written as someone who blends into a crowd. He's supposed to stand out the second he enters a room, and Ritchson captures that effortlessly. Whether he's walking through a diner, facing a group of armed criminals, or quietly observing a situation, there's always a sense that he's in complete control. What's impressive is that the show rarely has to convince you that he's dangerous. His appearance does most of the work before a fight even begins. When conflict finally breaks out, it feels believable that this is someone capable of ending it quickly. His commitment to the physical side of the role also deserves credit. The action scenes carry extra weight because he looks like someone who could genuinely overpower his opponents. The punches feel heavy, the movement feels confident, and there's a level of physicality that makes the fights more convincing than they would have been with a smaller or less imposing lead. That authenticity is one of the season's biggest strengths. A few conclusions are reached with remarkable confidence despite limited evidence, while certain decisions seem to happen because they keep the plot moving instead of feeling like the most logical choice. You understand why the story is doing it, but you can also see the machinery behind it. That illusion is important. The best action thrillers make unbelievable situations feel believable within their own world. They establish clear rules and stay consistent with them. Season 2 sometimes stretches those rules just a little too far. Reacher himself is part of that balancing act. He's supposed to be exceptional. He's stronger, smarter, and tougher than most people he encounters. That's the fantasy the series is built around, and it generally works. The issue isn't Reacher, it's everything around him. When villains repeatedly make convenient mistakes, when investigations solve themselves a little too neatly, or when dangerous situations resolve with surprisingly few consequences, the world starts feeling less authentic. Instead of reacting naturally, events begin to feel arranged around the hero. To be fair, many viewers probably won't mind. If you're watching purely for the action, the entertainment value remains high enough that these issues are easy to overlook. The season moves quickly, the confrontations are enjoyable, and Alan Ritchson has enough presence to carry almost every scene. But for anyone looking for a thriller that feels grounded, these moments become harder to ignore as the episodes progress. It's not that season 2 becomes unrealistic overnight. It simply asks for one too many leaps of faith. Eventually, those small leaps become noticeable enough that they slightly weaken the tension, making the journey feel less believable than it could have been. And when a thriller loses some of its believability, it inevitably loses a little of its suspense as well. Reacher has never been the kind of series that relies heavily on visual effects, and honestly, that's part of its appeal. Most of the action works because it feels physical. You believe the punches, the stunts, and the close quarters fights because they seem grounded in real movement rather than digital spectacle. Season 2 mostly sticks to that formula. But every now and then, it reaches for something bigger, and those moments don't always have the impact the show is aiming for. There are sequences where the action feels a little too polished, a little too exaggerated, almost as if the series starts chasing blockbuster scale instead of trusting the gritty style that made it work in the first place. It's not a constant problem, but when it happens, it stands out. Some scenes also ask the audience to accept situations that feel more exaggerated than believable. Whether it's the way certain confrontations unfold or how easily some characters escape impossible situations, the show occasionally pushes beyond the grounded tone that Season 1 established. That's where the illusion starts to crack. The strongest moments in Reacher have never depended on flashy visuals. They're usually built around simple ideas: a tense conversation before a fight, a clever observation that changes the investigation, or a brutal hand-to-hand confrontation where every hit feels heavy. Those scenes work because they feel authentic. When the series leans too heavily into larger, more stylized action, it risks losing that authenticity. Instead of feeling raw and dangerous, a few sequences become more about looking impressive than making the audience feel the danger. To be clear, the production quality itself is still strong. The series looks expensive, the locations are convincing, and most of the technical work is solid. Nothing here suggests a lack of budget or effort. The criticism isn't about how the show looks, it's about how certain moments are presented. Sometimes less really is more. Reacher doesn't need oversized spectacle to be entertaining. The character is already compelling enough. His presence, confidence, and physicality naturally create excitement without requiring every confrontation to become larger than the last. Ironically, the most memorable action scenes this season are often the simplest ones. A direct fight, a tense standoff, a quiet moment before everything falls apart. Those are the scenes that stay with you. The more exaggerated moments, on the other hand, tend to blur together. They're entertaining while they last, but they don't leave the same lasting impression because they feel more like generic action than uniquely Reacher action. Season 2 never becomes an effects-heavy spectacle. It just occasionally forgets that its biggest strength has never been visual scale. It's always been the man standing at the center of it. One thing that's difficult to criticize about Reacher Season 2 is the overall production quality. Whether you end up loving the story or feeling disappointed by it, the series rarely looks cheap. From the opening episodes, it's obvious that this is a big-budget production. The season moves through multiple cities, larger environments, and a wider variety of locations than before. That alone gives everything a more cinematic feel. Instead of spending most of its time in one setting, the show constantly changes its surroundings, helping the world feel much bigger than it did in the first season. The attention to detail is also noticeable. The sets feel lived in, the locations suit the tone of the story, and the overall presentation has the polish you'd expect from one of Prime Video's flagship action series. Nothing really stands out as unfinished or rushed from a visual standpoint. The action benefits from that budget as well. Whether it's the larger shootouts, moving vehicles, or different environments the team passes through, there's a clear sense that the production had enough resources to stage ambitious sequences. Even if not every action scene is memorable, they rarely feel limited by the show's budget. Another thing the season does well is maintaining a consistent visual identity. Even though the story moves across different locations, everything still feels like it belongs to the same world. The lighting, camera work, and overall presentation remain consistent enough that the series never loses its identity while traveling from one setting to another. That's important because a show built around constant movement can easily start feeling disconnected. Here, the production keeps everything visually cohesive. Even viewers who criticize the writing or pacing often acknowledge that the series looks impressive. The camera work is clean, the environments are believable, and the overall presentation gives the season a premium feel from beginning to end. Of course, strong production values can't solve every problem. A bigger budget doesn't automatically create stronger dialogue, more memorable villains, or a tighter mystery. Those elements still depend on the writing, but having a polished presentation certainly makes the season easier to watch, even during its weaker moments. In many ways, Season 2 succeeds in looking like a bigger show. The scale is larger, the locations are broader, the production is more ambitious. Whether the storytelling grows at the same pace is a different conversation entirely. Still, purely from a technical standpoint, Reacher Season 2 delivers the kind of polished, high-quality presentation you'd expect from a major streaming series, and that's one area where it consistently meets expectations. Even among viewers who had mixed feelings about Season 2, there were a few technical aspects that received surprisingly consistent praise. The music is one of them. The score doesn't constantly demand attention, but it knows when to step forward. During tense investigations, quieter moments, or major confrontations, the soundtrack does a good job of supporting the mood without overwhelming it. It helps build atmosphere instead of trying to create excitement on its own. There are also a few well-placed musical choices throughout the season that add personality to certain scenes. They're small touches, but they give the series a little more character and occasionally provide some welcome humor in between the heavier moments. The costume department deserves credit as well. One thing Reacher has always done well is making its characters look believable within the world they're operating in. The tactical gear, everyday clothing, and overall styling all fit naturally. Nothing feels overly flashy or distracting, and the wardrobe helps reinforce each character's role without drawing unnecessary attention to itself. Even something as simple as Reacher's appearance remains consistent with the character. His clothing is practical, uncomplicated, and exactly what you'd expect from someone who spends most of his life moving from place to place with almost no possessions. The same attention extends to the supporting cast. Whether they're law enforcement, military personnel, or the people caught in the middle of the investigation, everyone generally looks like they belong in the environment the story has created. That consistency makes the world feel more authentic. Technically, the series is equally solid. The sound design gives weight to the action without becoming excessive, and the editing keeps the episodes moving at a comfortable pace. Fight scenes feel impactful, gunfire has presence, and quieter moments aren't buried beneath unnecessary background noise. None of these elements steal the spotlight, but together they create a polished viewing experience. That's important because technical quality often goes unnoticed when it's done well. People rarely leave an episode talking about the sound mix or the wardrobe unless something goes wrong. In Season 2, those departments quietly do their job, and they do it well. Of course, great technical work can't fix problems with pacing or storytelling. If the script doesn't fully deliver, strong production design can only carry the season so far. But it does make the experience more enjoyable. Even during weaker episodes, the series still feels professionally made from beginning to end. So while opinions remain divided on the writing, the mystery, and the overall direction of the season, the craftsmanship behind the scenes is much easier to appreciate. It may not be the reason people remember Reacher Season 2, but it's certainly one of the reasons the show remains consistently watchable. One of the more interesting aspects of Reacher Season 2 is how much time it spends with characters other than Reacher himself. Compared to the first season, the supporting cast has a much larger role, and that naturally changes the feel of the series. For the most part, the cast does a solid job. Because Reacher is such a reserved character, he needs people around him who can bring different personalities into the story. The conversations become livelier, the investigation feels more collaborative, and there are moments where the chemistry between the team makes the episodes more enjoyable than the actual mystery they're trying to solve. The military background shared by the group also helps. These aren't strangers forced to work together. They already know each other's strengths, understand how the others think, and communicate with a level of trust that feels believable. That history gives many scenes a natural rhythm without requiring constant explanations. The female characters are another noticeable part of the season. Rather than existing simply to support the lead, they're actively involved in the investigation and the action. They're capable, experienced, and contribute to the mission instead of standing on the sidelines. That balance generally works well because the series allows them to feel like professionals rather than forcing moments just to remind the audience how capable they are. That said, not every supporting character leaves the same impression. Some members of the team are memorable almost immediately, while others blend into the background as the season progresses. With so many characters sharing screen time, it's inevitable that a few receive stronger development than others. The same applies to the villains and recurring side characters. A handful make an impact when they first appear, but not all of them receive enough material to stay memorable by the end of the season. You remember their role in the story more than you remember them as individuals. There's also an unintended side effect to giving the supporting cast so much attention. The more the series shifts focus away from Reacher, the less dominant he sometimes feels within his own show. That's not because the supporting performances are weak, quite the opposite. It's simply the result of dividing the narrative among a much larger group of people. Still, when the team is working together, there's a believable sense of camaraderie. Their conversations feel like people with shared history rather than strangers brought together for one mission. Those moments add personality to the season and help separate it from a typical one-man action series. Overall, the supporting cast is one of Season 2's stronger elements. Not every character receives enough development to become unforgettable, but the group as a whole brings energy, variety, and a sense of teamwork that keeps the story moving. Even when the plot stumbles, the cast usually gives you a reason to stay invested in what happens next. One thing Reacher Season 2 never tries to hide is the kind of action series it wants to be. This isn't a complicated spy thriller filled with endless twists or morally gray characters. It doesn't spend hours questioning its own hero or trying to reinvent the genre. Instead, it embraces a style that feels surprisingly familiar, almost like stepping back into the action movies and television shows that dominated the late 80s and 90s. And honestly, that's part of its appeal. Jack Reacher is the kind of protagonist those stories were built around. He walks into dangerous situations without hesitation, doesn't waste words, and solves problems with a combination of confidence, experience, and overwhelming force. The formula isn't new, but the series doesn't pretend that it is. There's something refreshing about that. Modern action shows often try to be bigger, darker, or more complicated than necessary. Reacher, on the other hand, is usually at its best when it keeps things straightforward. There's a mission, there are bad people standing in the way, and Reacher is determined to finish the job. Season 2 continues that tradition. Even when the story becomes more complicated than it needs to be, the overall spirit remains simple. The focus stays on investigations, confrontations, and action, rather than constantly trying to surprise the audience with dramatic twists. That old-school approach is probably why the series has connected with so many viewers. It knows exactly what kind of entertainment it's offering. You're not watching for deeply philosophical conversations or groundbreaking storytelling. You're watching because there's something satisfying about seeing a capable hero walk into impossible situations and calmly take control. Of course, leaning into that style also has its drawbacks. The season occasionally falls into familiar genre patterns. Certain confrontations play out exactly the way you'd expect, and some story beats feel borrowed from classic action formulas. If you've watched enough action films over the years, you'll probably recognize where a few scenes are heading long before they arrive. But nostalgia can be powerful. For some viewers, those familiar elements are part of the experience rather than a weakness. They don't want the formula completely reinvented, they just want it executed well. And that's where Season 2 lands. It doesn't redefine old-school action. It simply tries to deliver another solid entry in that tradition. Whether it succeeds depends on what you're looking for. If you want a fast-moving action series with a larger-than-life hero who doesn't overcomplicate things, Reacher still delivers plenty of entertainment. If you're expecting the genre to evolve in new directions, Season 2 may feel a little too comfortable relying on familiar ideas. Either way, one thing is clear. Reacher knows exactly what kind of action hero it wants to celebrate, and it rarely apologizes for it. One of the most interesting conversations around Reacher Season 2 has very little to do with the show itself. It has to do with who's watching it. Because the experience changes quite a bit depending on whether you've read the books or you're coming in with no expectations at all. If you're a casual viewer, there's a good chance you'll have a fun time. The series moves quickly, the action is frequent, Alan Ritchson is an intimidating lead, and every episode gives you enough entertainment to keep watching. You don't really need to know anything about Jack Reacher beforehand. The show explains just enough to pull you into the story, and for many people, that's more than enough. In that sense, Season 2 succeeds. It's accessible. You can jump in, enjoy the investigation, watch Reacher dismantle another group of bad guys, and move on to the next episode without overthinking every detail. Book readers, however, tend to watch the series a little differently. They're not just judging whether the episodes are entertaining. They're constantly comparing the television version of Reacher with the character they've spent years reading about. That naturally creates a much higher standard. For many of those viewers, the biggest issue isn't the action or even the story. It's the characterization. The novels present Reacher as someone whose intelligence is every bit as important as his physical strength. He's patient, observant, methodical, and almost frighteningly analytical. Season 2 still hints at those qualities, but many readers feel they no longer define the character the way they should. That difference shapes almost every opinion about the season. Someone unfamiliar with the books may simply see a confident action hero leading his team through another investigation. A longtime reader may watch the exact same scene and immediately notice that something feels different, not because the plot has changed, but because Reacher himself doesn't always think or behave the way they expected. Interestingly, both perspectives can be valid. The series doesn't completely abandon the source material, nor does it follow it perfectly. It sits somewhere in the middle, staying faithful in some areas while simplifying others to fit a television format. That's why reactions to Season 2 are so divided. Many casual viewers describe it as an enjoyable action series that delivers exactly what it promises. Many book fans enjoy parts of it as well, but they're also more likely to notice what's missing compared to the original character. Neither group is necessarily wrong. They're simply measuring the show against different expectations. And that's probably the biggest challenge any adaptation faces. A series has to satisfy people discovering the character for the very first time while also convincing longtime fans that the character they love is still recognizable. Season 2 manages the first part reasonably well. The second part is where opinions become far more divided. Season 2 is one of those shows that's surprisingly easy to watch, even while you're noticing its flaws. That might sound contradictory, but it's true. Every episode gives you enough action, enough momentum, and enough of Alan Ritchson's screen presence to keep you pressing next episode. At no point does the series completely fall apart or become difficult to finish. In fact, it's entertaining for most of its runtime. The disappointment comes from a different place. It's not about what Season 2 is, it's about what it could have been. After such a strong first season, expectations naturally increased. The foundation was already there, a compelling lead, a recognizable formula, and a style that balanced mystery, action, and dry humor remarkably well. All Season 2 really needed to do was build on those strengths. Instead, it feels like the series chose to go wider rather than deeper. The action became bigger, the cast became larger, the locations expanded, but somehow the emotional investment didn't grow alongside them. That's why so many reactions to this season feel mixed rather than completely negative. Even viewers who criticize the writing, pacing, or mystery often admit they still had a good time watching it. The show remains entertaining enough to carry you from beginning to end. It just doesn't leave the same lasting impression. There are plenty of moments you'll enjoy while they're happening, solid fights, confident one-liners, satisfying victories, but once the season is over, surprisingly little sticks with you. The excitement stays in the moment instead of growing into something memorable, and that's probably the biggest difference between good and great. Great seasons stay in your mind long after you finish them. Season 2 is more likely to leave you remembering individual action scenes than the story that connected them. That doesn't make it a failure, far from it. There are still enough strengths here to recommend it, especially if you're already invested in the character or simply enjoy straightforward action thrillers. The production is polished, the pace rarely drags for long, and Alan Ritchson continues to be a convincing physical presence. But it's difficult to ignore the feeling that the series settles for being good when it had every opportunity to be much better. That's why the word that best describes Season 2 isn't bad. It's disappointing, not because it lacks entertainment, because it never quite reaches the standard it set for itself. You can absolutely enjoy the ride. You just can't help wondering how much stronger it could have been if the writing had matched the potential of everything else surrounding it. If there's one lesson Reacher Season 2 leaves behind, it's that bigger budgets and bigger action can only take a series so far. Eventually, everything comes back to the writing. That's where many of the season's strengths and weaknesses begin. The foundation is actually solid. The premise is interesting, the cast is capable, and the lead character is still someone you want to spend time with. On paper, all the pieces are there for another standout season. The problem is how those pieces are put together. There are several moments where the script chooses the easiest path instead of the most interesting one. Characters arrive at conclusions a little too quickly, important conversations don't carry enough weight, and certain plot developments feel more convenient than earned. None of these issues completely derail the story, but together they stop it from reaching the level it could have. That's why the season often feels entertaining rather than gripping. You're always moving toward the next objective, but you're not always emotionally invested in how you get there. The investigation continues, the action keeps coming, and the mystery unfolds, yet there are surprisingly few moments that truly make you stop and think. A little more depth would have made a huge difference. Not necessarily by making the story more complicated, but by giving the characters and the investigation more room to breathe. Sometimes the best scenes in a thriller aren't the explosions or the shootouts. They're the quiet moments where the audience starts connecting the dots alongside the main character. Season 2 doesn't slow down often enough to let those moments develop. The dialogue could also have been stronger. Several conversations do their job by delivering information, but they don't always reveal much about the people speaking. The strongest character interactions are the ones that feel natural and effortless. Too often, the script focuses on moving the plot forward instead of letting personalities shine through. The same applies to the mystery. The overall case has potential, but it doesn't always challenge either Reacher or the audience in meaningful ways. A few more genuinely clever twists, stronger investigative sequences, and less reliance on coincidence could have elevated the entire season without changing its core identity. What's frustrating is that none of these improvements require reinventing the show. Reacher doesn't need to become a psychological drama or an overly complex detective series. It simply needs writing that's as sharp as its main character is supposed to be, because when the script is firing on all cylinders, everything else naturally falls into place. The action becomes more exciting because the stakes matter. The villains become more intimidating because they're written with purpose. And Reacher himself becomes even more compelling because his intelligence carries just as much weight as his physical strength. Season 2 proves the series still has enormous potential. It just needs scripts that trust the audience a little more and challenge its characters a little harder. If future seasons can tighten the writing while keeping everything else that already works, Reacher won't just be an enjoyable action series. It can become a genuinely great one. After spending an entire season with Reacher again, I walked away with mixed feelings. Not frustrated, not disappointed enough to stop watching. Just convinced that this season never fully lived up to what it was capable of. That's what makes Season 2 such an interesting case. It isn't a bad season by any means. There are far weaker action shows out there. The production quality is high. Alan Ritchson continues to own the role physically, and there's enough action and momentum to make the episodes easy to binge. You rarely feel like you're wasting your time. At the same time, it's difficult to ignore how often the season settles for good enough. The writing isn't as sharp as it could be. The mystery doesn't create enough genuine suspense. Some of the action becomes repetitive, the dialogue occasionally feels forced, and several characters don't leave the impact they probably should have. None of those issues ruin the experience on their own, but together, they prevent the season from reaching the level of the first. Ironically, the biggest strength of the show is still the same thing that keeps you watching: Jack Reacher. He's an effortlessly entertaining character. Whether he's walking into a dangerous room, sizing people up without saying a word, or ending a fight in a matter of seconds, he has a screen presence that's difficult to ignore. Alan Ritchson deserves a lot of credit for making that feel believable from beginning to end. The encouraging part is that none of the season's problems feel permanent. This isn't a series that has lost its identity. It hasn't abandoned the character, and it hasn't run out of interesting stories to tell. If anything, Season 2 feels like a reminder that the formula still works. It just needs stronger execution, sharper writing, smarter investigations, more memorable villains, and a little more confidence in letting Reacher's intelligence drive the story instead of relying so heavily on constant action. Those aren't massive changes, they're adjustments. That's why I don't see Season 2 as a warning sign for the future. I see it as a season that experimented with a larger scale, succeeded in some areas, stumbled in others, and showed exactly where the series needs to improve. At the end of the day, I still enjoyed watching it, not because it consistently surprised me, but because Reacher remains a character worth following. Even when the story loses focus, there's something satisfying about watching him step into impossible situations with complete confidence and methodically take control. So if you're expecting Season 2 to surpass the first season, you may come away a little disappointed. If you're simply looking for a polished action thriller with a charismatic lead and plenty of entertaining moments, there's still a lot here to like. It may not be Reacher at his absolute best, but it's far from Reacher at his worst. And with the right improvements moving forward, this series still has every opportunity to get back to the level that made so many people fans in the first place.